Welcome to another Apollo Papyrus episode. I am Aaron Apollo Cam. For this episode, my interview guest is one of the more interesting guests I've had the opportunity to interview. He is a humorist who once won the Chicago Humorous Speaker of the Year award with a speech about customer service in a prison, and he is the author of 5 books, 2 of which were inspired by the great Mark Twain. His name is Conor Cunneen, and here's my interview with Conor. Conor Cunneen, did I pronounce your name correctly?
You did indeed, Aaron. Yes, Conor Cunneen.
Welcome to Apollo Papyrus.
Thank you very much. Looking forward to the chat.
Feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Okay, I'm Conor Cunneen, and that's Conor with only one N, by the way, Aaron, because my parents could not afford 2 N's when I was born in Ireland. Conor Cunneen, the brand is Irishman Speaks, and I'm a keynote speaker, business humorist, consultant, facilitator, and the mission is to improve people, performance, and productivity with a smile. So when I speak to associations or corporations, I want to leave them with a smile on the face, with a spring in the step, and with some memorable, actionable takeaways to help them to keep on keeping on during what are challenging times.
2 of your books were inspired by the great Mark Twain and feature his likeness on the cover. Without spoiling your 2 Mark Twain-inspired books, what are each of them called and what are they about?
Right. I became a big fan of Mark Twain a number of years ago. I didn't really know much about him when I was growing up in Ireland. In Ireland, basically, the only literature that was beaten into us in school was something that might have been written by a Catholic patriot who had been put to death by the British. That was the kind of education system we had. So I discovered Twain when I came over to the United States. And the 2 books are quite different. One is, as a professional speaker, I want to make sure that I communicate well, and anyone who wants to speak in front of an audience can communicate well also. So the first book I did was titled What Mark Twain Can Learn You About Public Speaking. And I use the word learn because that was the kind of idiom he might have used. What Mark Twain Can Learn You About Public Speaking. And then this second book, Aaron, Mark Twain was an acerbic political commentator. He hated the cant and the hypocrisy of politicians in his time. So he'd have a great time now. And the name of that book is titled Suppose You Were an Idiot. Mark Twain on Politics and Politicians. Suppose You Were an Idiot, Mark Twain on Politics and Politicians. And I've written 3 other books as well.
About your other 3 books, what are each of them called and what are they about?
Right. 3 other books. The first book I actually wrote was a business book done in story form. And it was actually titled Why Ireland Never Invaded America. Why Ireland Never Invaded America. And the basic idea behind that was that we had a US person coming over to Ireland to visit his cousin for a period of time. The US person named Jake was having difficulty with his business, and he was talking to his Irish cousin who had a weird Irish name of Finbar Kozlowski. Okay. And Finbar Kozlowski and Jake bonded, and they discussed business topics like branding, marketing, clear vision, etc., but done in the story form with some slightly goofball humor, but always good lessons, I hope. And that was the first book that I published. Then I've written 2 other books. One of them, it's based on my Irish heritage, and it's titled A History of Ireland, an A to Z of Irish history, where I do limericks for each letter of the alphabet based around Ireland. So for instance, and then a little bit of history. So for instance, the letter D would be, D is for Dublin. And the limerick goes, its capital city is Dublin, where nothing is ever too troubling, where the beer isn't green, but it's great to be seen, and the people in Dublin are bubbling. And then I do a little bit of history of how Dublin was founded by the Norsemen, the invaders from Scandinavia, etc. And the basic idea behind that book, beautifully illustrated by an artist by the name of Mark Anderson, is it's a fun book, a coffee table book that I'm really proud of. And the final book then is when I came over here to the United States, originally I was working with a company called Unilever. And after a few years, Unilever, Aaron, wanted me to go back to the Europe for family reasons. My daughter had just started in Wake Forest in North Carolina at the university down there. I said no. I told Unilever to get stuffed. They told me get stuffed, so we were mutual stuffing. But it was amicable, though. A person, a single individual cannot tell a corporate how to handle their personnel policies. So I left them, got involved in helping people in the job search community, because I was kind of going through that myself while I was discovering what I wanted to do. And I've written a book called SHIEFGAB, which is an acronym for 8 building blocks to staying sane, motivated, and productive during job search. SHIEFGAB, staying sane, motivated, and productive during job search. And that also is done in storybook form, but with really good lessons, 8 lessons spelling the acronym SHIEFGAB.
If you have a typical writing routine, what is that like for you?
Right. The typical writing routine, what I do believe, Aaron, is that if you want to write a book, you got to commit some time to doing it. And the basic way I think that people that I find most productive is that I've got to do a certain amount of time continuously. So even if it's only 45 minutes or 60 minutes, I need to do that day after day after day, because otherwise you kind of forget what you were writing about yesterday, what the mood was, what kind of vibe you were trying to create, etc. And you do need discipline to be able to write and complete a book. So I do remember when I wrote my first book, Why Ireland Never Invaded America, I would actually go down to the local Starbucks. I'd crank up my computer, which at that stage probably had about an hour and a half of memory or battery life. And when the battery went dead, boom, that's when I stopped writing that day. But I'd go on the following day, and then I'd write another for another 75 minutes or so. So I'm not saying you have to write every day, but I do think you got to be consistent, because if you write today, don't do anything for another 10 days, and then start writing again, you've lost the rhythm, the mood, the vibe, I think, that was motivating you the last time. So consistency for any writers, I think, is critical.
Are all your books self-published, traditionally published, or published via hybrid press, or did you use different publishing methods for your books?
Excuse me. Most of them are independently published, and I think that's a very, very appropriate way for most authors to go. The only book that wasn't independently published was For the Love of Being Irish, an A to Z of Ireland through Limericks. That was done through a publishing house here in the Chicagoland area. But I'm sure you've had other authors make this comment as well. At the end of the day, unless you're a John Grisham or someone, being published by a major publishing house ain't going to do you much good in terms of marketing. You got to do your own marketing and your own promotion for your books and for your material. And that, I think, is where so many authors fall down, myself included to a certain extent, in that we create the wonderful child, the baby, and then we forget to kind of nourish it and help it to grow. And some people obviously have used the analogy that writing a book is like having a child. Yes, it is. But once the child has been birthed, you got to allow that child, help that child to grow and to develop. And most of us authors, I think, forget to do that and don't appreciate that you got to promote your book. Otherwise, unless you're incredibly lucky, it is not going to get serious sales volumes.
You've given keynote speeches, and what are some keynote speeches you've given, and how do you inject humor into them?
Right. As a keynote speaker, I position myself as a keynote speaker. Irishman Speaks, and the mission is to improve people, performance, and productivity with a smile, Aaron. So if you consider literally every single organization wants to improve their people, their performance, and their productivity, no matter how well they are performing. And if you can do that with a smile, it makes it even better. So, excuse me. What I try to do is I try to understand what challenge the client has got, customize my material. I'll give you an example of the kind of material I do in a moment to the client, and then present it to them. And hopefully the audience is leaving with a smile on the face, with a spring in the step, and with some memorable, actionable takeaways that will help them to keep on keeping on during the challenges that they have got. So I speak on marketing, employee engagement, customer service, and I speak into the healthcare area as well. So my most popular speech that I can customize for almost any audience is titled The Gift of Gab. And you're thinking, hey, the gift of gab from an Irishman? Yay! Right. But GAB, though, Aaron, is an acronym for goals, attitude, behavior. Goals, attitude, behavior. And I talk about having the importance of having micro goals on a daily basis to improve you and your people. I talk about the importance of having a good attitude and asking yourself, what do I want my attitude to be when things are difficult? I talk then about your behavior, and your behavior creates your brand. So what I do is I try to take some humorous anecdotes from my own life, or anecdotes that I've heard from other people or read, drop those in as part of the way to smooth, to grease the content that I have got. So it's not just a boring presentation about leadership. No, it's more than that. It's not a boring presentation about the importance of being a good team member. It's good content, good storytelling, good humor.
Now that GAB acronym, are those the three key attributes to developing one's own personal brand?
They actually are, Aaron. And basically what I look at is, if we take the micro goals, I talk about having a clear vision as to what you want to be famous for. And the basic idea there, Aaron, is what do you want people to say about you when you're not in the room? Or for your particular case here about your podcast, what is it you want your listeners to say about this podcast when they are describing it to other people? So what you're trying to do is you're trying to figure out what is the impression or the brand experience that I am going to leave people with. And what I suggest is that if you take this goals, attitude, behavior, GAB, gift of GAB, it can help you. So when it comes to goals, for instance, I say you define what you want to be known for, and then I'll provide you with 5 micro goals that will help you to achieve that macro goal. And the 5 micro goals, believe it or not, I'm a big believer in acronyms, Aaron. The 5 micro goals spell the acronym CHAPS, CHAPS. And I'm working on a book on this at the moment, but the idea behind the CHAPS acronym is that 5 micro goals, if you set yourself a micro goal that I will compliment one person every day, when you set it as a micro goal, you will feel better when you achieve that micro goal, but the person you're complimenting will feel better. That's the first element of the CHAPS acronym. The second micro goal is to hear the words thank you from someone each day. Actually hear it. And to make sure you have to hear the words thank you, you've got to do something to help your work colleague or your neighbor. So when you hear the words thank you, you realize, hey, I've achieved another micro goal in this CHAPS acronym. I feel better, but the person that I've helped is obviously going to appreciate me more as well. Then you've got A, and A is for address. And by that, I mean you address people with their name when you're in conversation with them. And when you do that, Aaron, you will actually connect better with them. The most powerful word in our vocabulary, both of us, when we're speaking to each other, is the other person's name. It really does have to make a connection with that other person. So you got compliment, hear the words thank you, address people with their name. P is for positive. And the idea here, Aaron, is that if you use positive words and positive phrases on a regular basis, people will see you as being positive and they'll appreciate the positive vibe that you're creating. And the final element of the CHAPS acronym, compliment, hear the words thank you, address people with their name, positive words. S is for smile. And the basic idea here is that you put a smile on someone's face. And when you put a smile on someone's face, well, you're going to smile back. It's a win-win again. So CHAPS is a win-win formula to create a great personal brand, to create a better teamwork, a better work environment. And from the experience and the reaction I get from my clients, I know it does make a difference.
You've also used another acronym, LAUGH. What does that stand for? What purpose does that acronym serve? And what is your best advice for adding humor to speeches?
Okay, all right. You've good for you. See, a good podcaster does their research, don't they? And you've done that. So I believe, as I said previously, in the power of acronyms. In fact, I actually say I have an acronym for the word acronym, which is all content remembered or names you mentioned. Okay, acronym. But when I talk, I've developed a program on adding humor to your presentation. I've just launched it in the last couple of weeks. And there's no doubt about it that if you want to connect well with your audience when you're doing keynotes or business presentations or sales presentations, if you can get them smiling or laughing once or twice in a conversation, you're going to connect better and get a better reaction. So I'm going to ask you a question, Aaron, and we'll see whether or not we get the right answer from you, all right? But I'm looking for a 5-letter word. And the 5-letter word, if I say to you, if I say something funny to you, Aaron, what is it that I hope that you will do?
Laugh.
Laugh. Okay. All right. So the laugh is what I'm looking for. That's L-A-F-F. Oh, no, that's 4 letters. L-A-U-G-H. Okay. All right. So laugh is an acronym that if you adopt and adapt, it will help you to add humor to your presentation. And the most basic one of these, Aaron, is I say to people, you don't have to be funny to be funny. And they look at me and they go, that's funny. No, but you don't have to be funny to be funny. What you need is you need a commitment that when I'm going to be presenting or speaking, I will add some humor. So I've got to work at that. And the way I will add some humor is that I will just capture the humor I see around me. If I see something funny, write it into my notepad or into my iPhone. If I hear something funny, put it into my iPhone. Listen, put it into my iPhone. So L is the first element of the laugh acronym, listen. If I say something funny and you laugh, I will put it into my iPhone. If someone else says something funny and I laugh and I think it's anything I might ever be able to use at some stage, I listen and I'll put it into my iPhone and to my notes, and I've got that there. And that is really what I'm saying to people when they're worried about adding humor to the presentation. Start working on it. You don't know when you're going to listen to something funny, but when you do listen to something funny or read something funny, just capture it and put it into your iPhone or into your notepads. And that's the most important one. Capture the humor around you. The other elements of the LAUGH acronym are, so we got listen, A is for an anecdote, U is for uncomfortable. I'll go through them briefly again in a second. G is for Google, and H is going from he to ho, ho, ho. So listen, we've covered. A and U will take together. Aaron, if you consider some of the times you've laughed in the last week, and on average, the adult person laughs about or smiles about 15 times a day. We don't really appreciate that, but if you start paying attention and listening to when you laugh or smile, you might actually appreciate that after a while. But over the last week, that would mean that roughly the average person has laughed about 100 times or smiled about 100 times. I would bet my bottom dollar that the vast majority of times that that person laughed or smiled, it wasn't because of a joke. It was because of a quip or an anecdote. And the funniest anecdotes are the ones where something went slightly wrong at some stage and you were almost uncomfortable at the time when it did go wrong. But now you can tell your friends about it and you're hamming it up a little bit maybe. Your friends are laughing, you're laughing, etc. So anecdotes about something that was uncomfortable at some stage can really be powerful ways for adding humor. If we've got time, I'll give you one brief example in a couple of seconds' time. And then when I talk about, so we've got listen, anecdotes, uncomfortable situations that you can now laugh about. G is for Google. And what I say here, Aaron, is I tell people to, crazy way of putting it, Google on the Bing, okay? You Google on the Bing for, so if you're doing a presentation on communication, podcasting, all right, one of the things you could do is you could go and do a search for Mark Twain quotes on communication or on storytelling, or humorous Mark quotes about humor, possibly. Mark Twain quotes about politicians. You could also do something like do Google on something like what did Groucho Marx say about communications or about organizations, and see what comes up from there. Take some quote that you feel is appropriate, you capture it or you listen to it, I capture it, and sometime during your presentation, then you can take that comment that you Googled on the Bing from, drop it into your presentation, and people say, hey, I loved your comment, that was very, very funny. You didn't create it, you captured it. And the final element of the laugh acronym, so we're going to listen, anecdote, uncomfortable anecdote, G is for Google on the Bing, and H is for he, to ho, ho, ho. And the basic idea here is that if you say something that gets a smile, gets a small little he, ask yourself, is there some way I can enhance that a little bit? Is there some word I can put in that will make it a bit funnier? Is there a word I could take out that might make it a bit funnier, etc.? And the more you get used to using the laugh acronym to add humor to your presentation, as I speak about in my course on adding humor to your presentation, the better your chances are of actually making it happen. So you've got to, it's like everything in life, Aaron, you got to work at it, you got to commit to it, you got to work at it, keep committing to it, etc. So the idea is that if you take the laugh acronym, you will have them laughing.
You once won Chicago's Humorous Speaker of the Year award with a speech about customer service in California's San Quentin Prison, which was the prison where the American country musician Johnny Cash once performed music in. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about that speech?
Yeah, that was a speech I did a number of years ago, and one of the ways to create humor is to provide surprise. So I was telling a story about an incident I had down in New Orleans on one occasion when my wife and I came over here originally, and we had a little bit of an issue with the customer service in a restaurant. So then I went on to say that, well, could you imagine if it's that difficult to get good customer service in a commercial environment, what would it be like if you tried to introduce it into someplace where you mightn't expect it, like San Quentin jail? So I then did a piece on San Quentin jail, took some of the things that you might think about San Quentin and just turned them around a little bit. So for instance, when I'm speaking to, and I've used this lines actually in business presentations as well, I said the mission statement for San Quentin goes as follows. Here in San Quentin, we are dedicated to your security. Your freedom is our number one concern. Okay? Goofball English in one sense, but it makes sense in one sense, it makes no sense in another sense, but it's kind of a contradiction. Here in San Quentin, we are dedicated to your security. Your freedom is our number one concern. So then I took other little examples of the way you might be able to adapt this and say that in San Quentin, well, we want to create this customer service culture. So we don't want to call people prisoners or inmates anymore. We'll call them guests of the nation. And what else can we say about San Quentin? San Quentin jail doesn't sound particularly good. So let's make it more hospitable. Let's call it the residents at San Quentin. Okay, so now we have the guests of the nation staying at the residence of San Quentin. And that's basically what I did through the 5 to 7 minute speech about just taking things that you expect in a prison environment, totally turn them around and try and create a kind of a surprise around it. So that was what got me the Humorous Speaker of the Year. And it's also what gave me the confidence, I think, to start adding more humor to my presentations. And as a result of that, I now have been able to pitch myself as a keynote speaker to improve people, performance, and productivity with a smile, Aaron.
I have one final question. What are some main differences between Irish culture in Ireland and Irish American culture?
I would say the biggest difference between Ireland and the US, no matter what culture you're talking about here in the US, is that, and then my wife regularly comments on this, you don't hear as much laughter in the United States as you do in Ireland. Ireland is, I think, a wonderfully affable, friendly country, great camaraderie, very, very welcoming. Now, it doesn't mean that once you're living there, you don't hate the people, your next door neighbors, etc. But initially, at least, very, very friendly and very, very welcoming. And there's such a good mood in general in the social environment. You go into an Irish pub or go into an Irish coffee shop, Starbucks or the local one, and you'll hear a lot more animation and laughter than you will in any similar environment here in the United States. And that's something that we do miss from time to time.
Conor, you were a very interesting guest. I thank you for appearing on Apollo Papyrus.
Thank you, Aaron. I really do appreciate it. You ask good questions and provide the opportunity for good conversation. So kudos to you, man. Well done. Thank you.
While we're on the subject of Chicago, I wish meteorologist and Chicago legend Tom Skilling a happy and wonderful retirement. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to write and read your passion. Bye for now. Remember to subscribe to the Apollo Papyrus YouTube channel at www.youtube.com/@ApolloPapyrus and the Apollo Papyrus Substack newsletter at apollopapyrus.substack.com. Y'all can visit the Apollo Papyrus website at campaaronapollo.wixsite.com/Apollo Papyrus and follow Apollo Papyrus on Threads, Instagram, Facebook, and Tumblr at Apollo Papyrus. Copyright 2024, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited, except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.